Rich Garcia Jr. here again with a new set of videos for the Sleeplight art frame. This has rocks in it. The painting that I'm going to be doing for the instructional video will have rocks because it's one of my favorite things to do for these types of paintings, because since they're on their own panels, when your eye kind of moves around the painting, when you're looking at it, when it's glowing, the rocks have a tendency to have the appearance of drifting slightly. As you can see, the rocks here are in front of the planet. It's on the one side of the painting, and then as you scan over, you got nebula in the background, and then over in this section here you have a ring planet. This is the room where I do the painting on all the panels, and I'll go through the setup, what I have here. I have a desk, with the black flat bed sheet on it to help reduce the scratchy surface, and also so that I can see and get rid of the lint with the lint roller a lot easier. Obviously just trying black before any other color because it's a lot easier to see what you're doing. Here I've got some test strip lights, and I have the switch for them right here. I have it set up independently from the room lights, that way it's nice and easy to turn the lights on and off. I did it this way, that way I can put one strip on the bottom and one strip on the top if I'm doing a horizontal, and I'll just put them right on the panels in between the spacers on the top of the second panel where they're going to actually go in the frame, and that will help give me a good idea of what it's going to look like when the painting is getting charged by the lights. Over here, I don't use a whole lot of water when I'm painting. I have a Q-tip which I keep on hand. I'll have some Q-tips laying around because sometimes when you go over the edge of something you're painting, or you just got to drop a paint somewhere it's not supposed to be, you can kind of use the Q-tip, kind of get it off of there before it dries. And then I have a bamboo skewer here that I use for scraping paint off of panels. If the edge kind of bleeds over where I want it to, where I don't want it to be, I can kind of, use a piece of tape and scratch up the paint and get rid of the debris fairly easy using one of these. I use this for my fine lines. Sometimes I use it to distort lines or make squiggle lines. It turns out a lot better than a brush because the brush's bristles, tend to bend, and I don't like being inaccurate when I'm doing real fine lines, so I kind of usually use this unless I have to use a brush. It's real simple. You're just gonna kind of load the paint on the very tip, and you'll get it down. You can kind of roll the stick while you're moving it. It's kind of like using a pen. The other thing I got going on over here is I got a drawing podium set up where you keep a pillowcase over the top. That way I can get the dust off of there and use this as a pretty tall drawing surface, because a lot of the time I prefer standing up as to sitting down when I work. The other thing I got going on over here is a storage cabinet, and when I'm done painting, I'll put all my supplies in here. That way when I go to lint roll or the desk surface and everything like that, I keep the dust off of the stuff I use. The other thing I do is I read somewhere that the glow-in-the-dark paints last longer when you keep them in the dark, because I guess the chemical process is triggered by UV light. So if you keep the paints out of the light, what I read is that they can actually hold their glow power longer for more years. So what I do is I use one of these clipboard box. I got my brushes in there, my smaller paint mixes, some of the stuff I use to add detail to the paintings, and then of course on the top I use the clip to hold paper towels in place, so that way I have somewhere to dry the brushes. And what I'll do is, if I gotta clean the tip of the bamboo, I'll just rub it on the paper towel to remove the paint when I'm cleaning. So it works out really good. If you don't like dust, it won't allow any of the dust to build up while your brushes are sitting out. I used to have them sitting on the desk all the time, and then I realized when I start painting, I start sneezing and stuff, so I kind of eliminated that. Over here, I have a couple of drawers designated to the stuff I'm doing in here. I've got a T-ruler and some stencils for circles, a medium-sized spacer, a larger spacer, and a thinner spacer, 2 inches or more, or stack them on top of each other to get the right kind of depth going for the painting frame I'm going to do. As far as this table is just mostly storage, so I can put the stacks of the paintings with the pillowcases on them. And I've got one under here, and of course another one here. And then the other thing I got going on is, what I'll do is I'll keep my extra panels inside here to help cut down the amount of dust they collect while they're sitting around to be used. What I do is, when I have a concept drawing that I want to try to make into a painting, I'll usually put it on this whiteboard. Sometimes you have a lot of problems with reflections on the panels below. This part here, where it's all dark, this is going to be a different layer than these rocks. These rocks here are in the foreground, these are a little further back, and these are further back. So between where the panel is physically in the frame and where the appearance of the rock, you want it to have the appearance of having distance going in. So what you're going to do basically is these bigger rocks will be on the foreground panels up in the front of the painting, and then these rocks, as you progress further in the painting, will get smaller in size. But with this particular painting, one of the challenges I have is it's supposed to be a blown out moon, where a comet maybe smashed through the moon, and then there's a hole in the moon, and then these pieces of rock here with all the detail on, those are ones going to be closer up front. Because the other thing you need to do is, as far as the illusion of distance, is you want to have the stuff in the foreground, like a regular flat painting, have more detail than the stuff in the background. So these pieces here that don't have the detail on the lit part of the faces are supposed to represent bigger pieces of the moon that are actually further into the panels, into the depth of the painting. So what happens is you have all these rocks that are above this dark spot on the moon. So you run the risk of having reflections all throughout the moon part here. So one of the things I do is I'll put my concept sketch up on this board, and when I'm thinking about it, I'll start looking at some of the potential problems I might have. This particular painting that I'm doing for the video, is one of the problems is the reflections. So what I'm going to do is, since it's a blown out moon, there's going to be different size rocks that are actually closer to the moon, because normally when I do the rocks, it's a progression of like the size to help with the illusion of the distance. And what you're going to want to do if you're doing the same painting as me is you're going to want to have the detail be more on the closer rocks and then less detail on the further bigger rocks. So these are all going to potentially reflect onto the panel right above the dark spot on the moon, because with these types of paintings, one of the problems you run against is anytime there's a dark spot in the painting, anything above it can reflect either off the panel above it to the one behind it, or it's just so bright that it's going to actually have a ring around the edge that reflects on the next panel down. So what these lines here represent is streaks of dust from the comet path, and we're going to have some on the back side of the planet and then more coming through the hole in the front, and there's going to be mist mixed out throughout. What I'll do is, while I'm doing the painting, I'll do all the rock placement where I want it, and then when I put the painting stacked up to kind of test panel, see what it looks like, I'll start adding dust and mist to help cancel out some of the reflections that might happen here. But like I said, these particular paintings with the rocks are my favorite because they tend to have a tendency to slightly float when you're looking at the painting in the dark. And to pull off the kind of mass group of rocks, that the density is, it's kind of a good idea to have them on the panel and not getting cut in half by the frame, but very close to the edges up in the front. And then you can kind of make the rocks a little more towards where the moon is in the center. That way, the deeper you look into the painting, you can have stars dotted on the frame, and it will actually look like those are very distant stars. These paintings are mostly inspired by the Hubble telescope for me, because the space paintings look pretty amazing when they have a whole bunch of different colors going on. So as far as realism, you can get away with doing the colors more realistic to the real universe and how it looks. But like I said, it's a little more pop to the paintings when you add the more vibrant glow-in-the-dark colors. The idea originally started out kind of like this and then evolved to something more like this. When I first started doing this, I wasn't sure what to expect, and what I realized right off the bat is a lot of reflection problems, and nothing kills the appearance of the painting more than having mirrored reflections where it's obviously, you know, it's like the planet and there's like 10 of them going down the panels. It's not going to look too realistic. So I would say, as far as placement of things, just kind of know that if you have a lot of empty spaces in your painting, that's going to be the potential for seeing reflections of things. When you're doing the paintings like this and they're on the different layers like that, the main problems that you have is if you have something bright, it can reflect off the panel above where it is onto the one behind it. So that's like a really bad one. So if you don't have something behind the rocks in the background or, you know, on other panels, sometimes you can get really bad reflection problems. A few things to keep in mind are how close they are to where the UV strips are going to go in the painting. They're going to kind of be on the bottom edges and the top edges if it's horizontal, or the left and the right if it's going to be, you know, a vertical painting. So when you have objects in the painting, you want to kind of don't have them too dense where the light's going to be, otherwise enough light won't get into the painting to charge all the panels. I would also recommend being prepared to put another set of UV lights deeper into the painting. Hide extra lights behind something like either mist or, you know, a dense, maybe a grouping of rocks or something, and then you can do smaller pieces. But sometimes you don't get enough light penetrating down to the back of the painting, and if you have a dim background, then you're going to have reflection problems. The other thing, I do my notes in a pretty loose way because I've done enough of these paintings to where I kind of already know what to expect. So like for instance, this one here, I kind of started out with this idea. I was going to do a gas planet, some color streaks and some blue in the background, stuff like that. I kind of evolved a little bit. I kind of wanted to challenge myself and do like an exploded moon, where like comets coming through and blowing out the other side. As I said before on the other notes, you know, proximity to the frame and stuff is going to help with illusions of distance in the deeper part of the frame by having stuff more towards the center, so you can put dot stars on the frame and it look like if you're looking through the section of space you're viewing, you can actually see the distant stars that look very far away. In this particular painting, you're going to have one problem, you know, the dark side of the moon here where there's no light, you're going to run the risk of reflection. So I'll do, like, since it's going to be a blown out moon, there's going to be smaller rocks and mist going, you know, to help cover up some of these trouble areas I might have. What I do is I just kind of put the color in so that I can keep track, and the blue I'm going to do is going to be darker than the neutral blue, because the neutral blue, without any kind of color tinting, is pretty bright, and I don't want to have it really hard to see the brighter small rocks that are in the painting. The numbers I'm doing, like I said, I'm starting on the second panel down, and I'm planning on having a really dense look to the rock, so I'm going to do a lot of panels. So I'm starting on the second panel, and as I go into the painting panel wise, I increase the number of rocks and I reduce the size of the rocks as I go deeper into the painting to help with the illusion of the depth. But for this particular painting, I'm going to have some larger pieces of the moon in the distance that are closer to the moon. So just like a flat painting, if you're going to have stuff, you know, closer and farther away, you're going to have the higher detail on the close-up stuff and, you know, less detail on the stuff that's supposed to be further away. I almost always have to deal with reflection problems as I'm making the painting. So what I do is, this is kind of a basic layout just to kind of get the size and to kind of help count up how many panels I'm actually going to have in the painting. So what I'll do is I'll kind of put the rocks where they look more appealing to my eye as I'm making the painting. So just be prepared to come across reflection problems. And later I'll go into detail about the back panel and what I'm going to paint on it, but I usually do that last in the painting. That way I can help address any kind of reflection problems I got going on by making the background either brighter or more busy than it is. I'm going to have some type of hole in the moon. I'm not sure if it's going to be this big or not. I might reduce the size and reduce the amount of the larger rocks that are closer to the moon. Be prepared to deal with two things: reflections and having to put extra lights in the painting. So what you can do also on the extra lights is sometimes you only really need to put one more light strip further in, because you'll get the UV light will kind of bounce around and bounce off the panels and stuff. This is going to be a short segment about the glow powder getting mixed into the clear acrylic. So the one thing I gotta say is if you're gonna get colors from a particular company, get the clear that company makes, because they're gonna have the pH values gonna be more adjusted to get a better mix out of your paint. Because I had some paint from a different brand and I used this acrylic clear for it, and the pH level must not have matched very well because the paint got really chalky fast. And it was kind of like one of those things, I mixed like a whole thing like this and then it ended up being no good like a day later. What I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be mixing some red. This is red strontium paint as opposed to red that's made with calcium sulfide. Now calcium sulfide paint charges really well in regular light, but it doesn't glow very long. Whereas this charges better in UV light as opposed to regular light, and it has a longer glow time. And this stuff is a little more orange color than I want, so I'm going to add a little bit of red paint to it. And when I add regular paint to tint the glow paints, I use transparent paint as much as possible. It seems to have a better glow value when you're using colors that aren't so opaque. That way you get better light transference through the paint that's in it. The other thing I do is I do these color tabs for each art piece, and that way later if I have to mix more of the paint, I can match it more accurately to what I started the painting with. I put a little bit extra powder in mine because when I use the glow paints, I almost always add a little bit of water to them to give me a longer working time with the paint before it dries out. Basically what I do is I got some of the clear acrylic medium in here already, and then I use a spoon to add the powder to it. So usually I'd go a little heavy like I said, and I've been doing this for a while, so I kind of already know the amount to go in. If you want to get real precise, you can try it that way too. Just stir it up in here like this, get it going. The other thing I do is I will have a paper towel, and after I mix this, I'm going to put some of it on the paper towel to test as the regular mix. And then as I add the red primary to it to tint it, I'll do a little bit next to it on the paper towel so that I can compare them. The glow-in-the-dark stuff doesn't show up too well on the video, so I'll be taking still pictures of this stuff so you can get a more accurate look at what it's actually going to look like. What I'll do is I'll just start adding the red to it, and I'm just going for a little bit of a tint just to kind of get it a little more red, because if I decide to put any orange glow paint in this painting, then I'm going to want it to be a pretty big difference in the glow power and the color. And after I'm done mixing this in here to the right amount, I'm going to take some and put it next to the neutral mix. So then I'll put this mix on here like this, and then I'll be testing it with the UV lights, and I'll be sure to take some pictures. Also mix some blue, and I'm planning on using two different tints of blue. I've got a medium blue, which is darker than a neutral blue, and then a dark blue, which is darker than the medium. Just go over some of the equipment I use when I clean the panels, and then once I get out in the garage, I'll show you the setup for the table and everything. So of course I got the dust mask here, very important. I would suggest that you always use one of these whenever you're handling the panels with the dust on them, so that way you don't accidentally inhale some. We got simple cloth gloves. They're just cotton. I keep them inside out just to keep the outside from getting any kind of grease or anything on them from handling them with finger oil and stuff like that. And of course here we have the lint roller, very important part of the cleaning process. So basically what you're going to do is wipe the panel with the glove on, and then Use the lint roller to take the dust off of the glove. Of course, we have blue tape to make the handles. Over here we have the spacers. Since this painting is going to have a lot of panels that are only about 1/4 inch apart, then I got the smaller 1/4 inch spacers to put in between the panels. As you can see how the panels are layered here. The tape panels I do these tabs so that way when you're moving the painting around while it's stacked up, you have something to hold on to. What I do is I store the panels either here or on the stack. That way I don't get dust buildup on the panels when I'm working on them. This is the table where I will double check the panels and make sure I have all the debris off of them. And I have the tape handles set up here, ready to go. And then I have another piece of tape to kind of pick up, dust particles off the panels when they're on the top here. Then you would pick up the dust off the top, slightly move the panel, and then go ahead and use the lint roller to pick up the dust off the table. I flip it over and do both sides. The other thing I'll do is I'll use the lint roller on the edges of the panels one last time to pick up any larger fragments of the acrylic panel that might be stuck on the edges. So what I did was I peeled off the plastic covering, and I'm not sure how well this will show up on the camera, but there's a lot of dust around the edges. And I got my lint-free sheet here. I got my lint roller. Basically what I'll do is just use it to grab all the dust particles from the panel off the gloves so that I can get them removed fairly easy. One of the problems is when you take off the plastic coatings, you end up with static electricity that causes all these pieces from the edges, all the fine dust that you don't vacuum up when you put them away, to get stuck to the surface. I'll go around the edge a couple of times with my gloves, and then what I'll do is I'll go around the edge of the panel with the lint roller to try to pick off some of the larger chunks that might come loose on the edges. I do this to reduce the amount of dust in my workspace because acrylic dust isn't healthy to breathe, and also because any bigger pieces that might fall off later can scratch your panels pretty badly. So I'll go around the edge like that. After you've gone around the edge a little to get some of the more dense areas of dust removed, then you just kind of, clean your gloves off. This is the best way I found to do it without using water or any kind of stirring up the dust more. So what you do is you just start, push down on the panel like this, go along, and then whatever dust you pick up, you take off the glove with the lint roller. And just repeat this process a few times, and then I'll lift it up and I'll look and see if there's any extra dust on there, get that removed, and then when I go into the house, I will put it on the table that I showed you with the black sheet and kind of shift the panel from side to side to see where the dust particles are and get the last of the remaining dust particles off that way. Probably takes about 10 times each side to get close. So what I'll do is when I get ready to do the other side, I'll lint roller, try to remove any dust that's stuck to the sheet, and then flip it over, and I'll just keep doing it until I'm satisfied that all the dust is off of there. Before we get started on painting anything on the panels and all that stuff, I wanted to go over a couple of things real quick. One of the problems with the clear panels is if you make a mistake that you can't either scratch the paint off or cover over it in a larger way to hide it, then sometimes you end up wasting panels with mistakes. It's good to keep the panels. You can use them to try out ideas before you commit to using a brand new, clean panel to do it. I have a lot of them, of course, because I'm self-taught, but they're also good later for putting the frame together and checking to make sure the slots and everything are the right depth and that the frame is going to sit the right way when you go to put in the screws and everything. So don't throw away any of your panels, and of course, if you have mistakes on parts of the panels that you can't use them, then you can use them for a few different types of things. You just put it in different spots on the panel and just kind of move the panel and put it over the top of the one that you're trying out or below or whichever. So they're really good to hold on to. The other thing is, of course, the advantage you have with the clear panels is that you can paint on the front side, and you can also paint on the back side of it. The one thing that you got to do though is you're going to have to put the paint on the back side in reverse. So whatever you want to have glowing needs to go on first. However many coats that it's going to take to match. If you have something that's the same color on the top side, of course you're going to want to match it for consistency, unless the lighting is different on one item as opposed to the other. When you do paint on the back side, it's hard to get a consistent look with certain things, like say the rocks. I start on the second panel down because the rocks on the top side, if you do one on the top panel, in order to keep it in the range of the UV lights to charge the paint and to prevent like dust from clogging up the paint, I put all the paint on the back side of it. So when you do a rock, you have to do the paint in backwards, but sometimes the look isn't very consistent to all the other rocks. So usually if I'm trying to involve the top panel in the painting, you could put like a little bit of mist, or you could put like a comet. But of course the moon's going to be fairly large, and having a little tiny comet in the front doesn't kind of look right. If this is like one of your first paintings doing this and you're doing the rocks and everything like I am, start on the second panel. The other thing you have to be careful is when you're on the first few panels down, you don't want to have the part of the rock that's the glow paint part too close. What can happen is the bottom, like if it's the UV light across the bottom and you have a rock right here, then this half of the glow paint might be so close to the UV light that it's super bright compared to the rest of the glow paint on there, and it kind of gives it like a 50-50 look to the glowing state of it. It'd be really bright at the bottom and then not so bright at the top, which sometimes it doesn't matter. But if you're going for a real consistent look with your rocks, I would say try not to get too close to where the UV lights are. And of course, the further deeper you go into the frame, the closer and closer to the UV lights you could have more rocks if you want to kind of fill out the lower area, because the top panels, like I said, will have fewer rocks, than as you're going deeper you'll have more and more rocks. When you're painting on the acrylic panels, they're not porous, so what you're going to have is some kind of tool to scratch it. I suggest using something like a sewing needle or something that has a round tip on it, because if you try to use like a nail, the tips are kind of cut, by a machine, kind of pinches them off, so then you end up with a flat spot on the point, and it's not round like it's a sewing needle. Like this is basically just a giant push pin that I tape some bamboo sticks to, so it's more like a pencil, and it works really well for me. I mention that because if it's not a point and you're trying to scratch a line, sometimes it can catch and make you go off course if it's not a round point. You could still do that with a round point, but it's more likely if you have some kind of like flat tip to it where it's not a point and where it's more like a screwdriver or something. You might end up catching on part of it when you're trying to go around a corner. It might send you off course. When you're making these paintings, you're going to be using the UV light, which allows you to get away with some amount of like smudges, fingerprints, and lint. I of course clean all the panels before I put them in the frame for the last time, but I did try to make one of these with regular white lights in them, and it's horrible. You can see every little ding, scratch, and everything, and it doesn't charge the paint nearly as well as the UV lights. You'll get away with small scratches, like maybe you put something in the wrong spot on accident and you just scrape the paint off and it's a little bit of scuff. Usually you don't notice that. It's usually the deeper scratches that you may not be able to hide so well. When you do a coat of paint on there with the glow paint, it's kind of like going back over it again is like painting on top of sandpaper. So expect your brushes to die pretty quick. But still, just like regular painting, you should hold on to your brushes until they're no longer usable at all for anything, because I did find when you have some worn out brushes, sometimes you get really cool patterns. So definitely use your brushes until they're just either petrified from paint being in the bottom, or there's no more bristle left and you can't use them for anything else. The glow paint comes in a range of sizes, and what I stick to is 15 microns, 30 microns, or 35 microns, because some of the specialty colors I like to use are 35 microns. But if you go much bigger than that, then what happens is you end up with a more like a splotchy look. It's a lot harder to get that nice solid color. And of course 15 is the smallest they do. As long as you let the paint dry completely before you put another coat on, then it shouldn't be too much of trouble, because The other benefit to it being kind of a rough finish when it dries is it kind of grabs the paint off your brush. I use ivory black and titanium white for my my mask colors for painting the glow paint on top of. What I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to build layers of the glow paint on the black paint. But of course, you can use a little bit less paint when you're doing the moon shading and craters and all that with white and black, and kind of get the light spots whiter, and then the spots you want more shadowed, you know, obviously more of a gray or a darker white, and then you go over it with the glow paint. And you can usually get away with using less going across the whole thing, but I kind of like to build the paint up. This is the stencil that I made to put the moon on. I put a couple of straight lines on graph paper here. That way when I go to do the shadow line for the dark part of the moon, then I know I can get a nice good straight line so it doesn't look cockeyed. And then also over here is where I put the marks to kind of stop the outside line for the moon surface. That way I can have the hole where the comet came out, you know, chipped away out of this side. And then on the back side, I'll probably put, you know, a line that's similar, just to designate the line on the back side of the panel is going to represent the other part of the hole that's across from this part of the hole on the front side. I put the stencil on the back side of the panel so that the stencil is going upright. And I decided that I was going to have the moon offset to one side just to make it a little more interesting in the frame instead of having it dead center. I'm going to flip this panel over. And then what I did was I put across on the back side too of the graph paper. Since I'm going to be scratching the other side of the panel, I need to see the lines as a guide for that, and I'll be putting them facing that way on the paper. That way when I flip over the panel, then they're facing the right direction. You got to make sure you decide, like if you want it to the left side on the back side, you're going to go to the right with the stencil. If you on the right side, when you flip it over, you're going to have to go to the left side with the stencil. Some of my other paintings I had to have more complex stencils to where it was two different parts, like the sea monster with the pirate ship that I did. I wanted to have the tentacles on different panels so that they would look deeper into the painting, and I could put waves in between and give the tentacles that look like they're really long underneath the surface of the water, and they're coming up in different spots. But in order to line everything up properly, I had to use a light table, and I put like one stencil down and then another piece of paper over it, and then draw the part that's supposed to be on that layer, and so on. And I did a few of those. So if you're having trouble lining up things like that and you do it on a light table, then you can, since the panel is clear, you can see through the graph paper and kind of line things up that way. Since I want the moon to be on the left side, I decided I'm going to also have to have the blown out part going to the right to have it go in the right direction when I flip it over. Next is I'm gonna put this not necessarily right in the middle horizon. I'm gonna go a little higher than that, just so I can get it to a little higher than center and a little you know, to the left side when I'm done. The next thing I'll do is I use a T-roller, and when you're lining graph paper up and you want to make sure something's straight, you're going to need to put the T-roller on the bottom part of the panel, because the bottom edge is going to determine how the panel sits inside the frame, as far as, you know, if it's level or not. I always like to do it this way, just to make sure everything's as straight as possible. I'm going to use the edge of the ruler and make sure that the space that I got going between the line and the ruler edge is consistent the whole way. I use blue tape, and I'll do blue tape on the back side of the paper to hold it up against the plexiglass. So what I'll do is I'll hold the paper, slide that over a little bit so I can get in the center. And when I do these, if they have you know, binder holes in them, I always get part of the binder hole too, because that way it's that much more of the tape on the panel and not on the paper to help keep it from moving. And then of course I'll make sure it's not baggy, and then I'll do the top side up here. just like that. It's good to go. So then I'll tape down the rest. Of course, you know, make sure it's not baggy when you're taping the sides. The other thing I do is I fold a tab over on both ends. That way it's a lot easier to pick up and peel off of there without having to scrape the panel trying to get the edge of the tape off. Then I've got the 4 pieces of tape on there, and then just flip it over like that, and there's the stencil in place. The next thing I'm going to do is line up the edges of the CD to the circle stencil, and then I'm going to use a piece of blue tape over the spot with the hole in the middle to secure it in place. So in order to do that though, you're going to have to be careful and double check that you got it in the right spot, because when you have light coming from the left or right, which you kind of have to because these panels are reflective, if you have a light right over you, it's just going to blind you. So you got to have your lights to the left and to the right of your workspace. But unfortunately what happens is the shadow from the edge of the CD will actually look like the line on the piece of paper that you're trying to line up with. So what I do is I kind of check out the middle here, and I use where the lines intersect with the edge of the circle, cutting off parts of the graph paper square on the corner, and try to like eyeball it. And then what I'll do is I'll actually tape it in place where I think it's good to go, and then I'll hold the panel up to the light to make sure that the edges of the CD, because I use the CD to make the stencil, that way I know it's a perfect match. And then, you know, I'll hold the panel up to the light so I can look through it and make sure that the line on the paper matches the edge of the CD. This isn't supposed to really hold it in place, it's just kind of to give me a little help holding it, so when I go around with the scraper tool I can, you know, get the line on there, kind of, you know, switch positions and you know, get the other half of the line. That's looking really good on the centering right there. So I'm gonna go ahead and give that a little, make sure that tape's nice and stuck to it. When you're doing the line, sometimes you have to backtrack in the line to get it to scrape out the channel that you're creating really well. Don't just, you know, go around once, kind of go a little back and forth, and you can feel it scraping the panel, and you can kind of tell that you're getting a good line or not by how much resistance you're getting when you're going around. Start my line where I'm going to have the break for the comet debris and the moon debris to shoot out. So I'm going to start right there. I go all the way up against the edge, and then I'll go around. You can probably hear it scraping that pretty good. And then of course you got to make sure you clean this stuff up too after you scrape the line, because you don't want to have panel pieces and shrapnel from doing this scratching the panel in other spots. So then I'll start over here, and as you can hear I'm going around and it's not really scratching. Sometimes if you go the other direction you can get it to scrape in pretty good. And of course if your line isn't complete, you know, the whole way around, you can kind of go back and forth a little bit like this. As long as you do 2 decent passes where you can feel it grabbing, then it shouldn't be too much of an issue. You should have a good line. I do it this way so I get a good guideline and make sure, you know, it gives you an edge. Like if you go over the edge, you can actually scrape the paint back to the edge, and it'll give you a nice perfect circle. If I just hold my head at a different angle, I can see where the chunks of acrylic are. And then of course, you know, I'll also probably go around this with the bamboo skewer to make sure that the channel is nice and clean. That way I get a good solid edge going where the channel for the moon is, so I can scrape the paint back to it. I'm going to start where I left off here and go up a little and kind of make like the cragginess of the hole from where the comet punched through. So I'm going to have it go like this kind of shape, and then after that I'm going to paint this part in with black paint. When I'm finished with the black paint, I'm going to use this part of the stencil line here and this part of the stencil line here to line up the T-ruler so that I can put tape over part of the moon so I get the nice middle line. And then I'm going to start with basically doing one coat of the glow-in-the-dark white paint right on top of the black. That way I can start, you know, forming my line of where the light has to end and the shadow part has to begin for the moonlighting. So I go up a little bit and then make kind of a jagged line going down to where that part is there. As far as scoring the inside of stuff, what I would suggest is, since this is going to be totally full with the black matte down, then you can scrape up the surface of this to get the tooth that you need to get the paint to stick real well. So like I said, you may not be able to see it, but I've got a line going here that I can see, and what I'm going to do is lightly score the rest of the moon. I don't go too crazy, I just do a couple of lines so that the paint has a good way to grab onto the panel. So what I'll do is I'll lightly score this, and then I'm going to reset after I clean it and start the painting process. This is going to take probably maybe like 3 or 4 coats of the black paint. As you can see, it's not really you know, solidly filled in, and you're going to want to have it solid. That way anything painted on the top isn't going to show through and glow on the back panels. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw in a center line so I can tape the moon off to do the glow paint on the part that's supposed to be lit by the light source. So I usually do this this way. It's just a little bit easier to get the line on there and then line up the tape, as opposed to trying to line it up with what's showing on the stencil still. So just go to where the line is on the stencil and then snug up the T-ruler up there. Make sure it's flat across the bottom, and then very lightly go across the black paint with the pencil. Then I'm going to put some painter's tape on there so I can keep the paint from bleeding over to the line. So measure off some tape. And I'm going to turn this sideways. That way I can get a little better lineup view. When I do the glow paint for a large area that I'm just going to kind of start, and I'm not going to get too crazy, I'll just work out of the paint container. So don't forget also, if you go over the edges, it'd be a good idea to scrape back the glow paint to the edges of the line for the opening in the moon. That way you don't have you know, a different look, because the glow paint that's not on the black is going to look a little different than glow paint that would be, you know, on the clear. It's going to get charged and probably be a little bit brighter, depending upon how much you go over the lines. So for this, I kind of do, it's kind of like a Bob Ross style of getting random crater spots and stuff like that. So I'll just do circles like this just to get the first coat on. If you're going to work out of these paint cups, make sure you're not getting color on your brush from the black paint and putting it into your white glow paint, because that can dim it pretty badly or affect, you know, the consistency and the glow power of the paint. So usually what I'll do is I'll have water up here, a towel, and what I'll do is I'll just dunk the brush into the water and wipe it on the paper towel just to double check, make sure I don't have any black coloration coming off the brush. So basically, since I'm going to be building up the paint, I don't want to go off too crazy. I just kind of get the first coat going, and then what you can do is, like I mentioned before, the paint is kind of gritty, so it'll pull color off your brush really easy. So I'll probably switch to a smaller brush so that way I can start going around and you know, maybe making some crater edges, or, you know, darkening smaller craters and canyons and stuff like that. As you can see, you kind of get a little bit of a pattern going when you do the circles, and then kind of also when you blot and just kind of fill in. You could add some other colors on parts of this to kind of tint it a little bit and make it look like it, you know, it's got blotches of like different minerals on the surface of the moon. What I'll do is I'll basically just, you know, keep in mind you don't want to go past the, you know, edge of where the moon would be if it was whole. So you gotta kind of end, you know, here or here, you know, but not go past this kind of invisible barrier here. So I'm gonna just go ahead and just scratch something in, and of course I got the tape to clean up the scratch debris. And I like to make the edge to where you can see the whole edge, you know, around the other side. So that way, you know, at least if you have any of it going behind, like right here, I'm going to have it go behind this part, but then it's going to come out again over here and go this way. I got the edge here. So now that there's a scuffed up line on there, I'm only going to scuff the line. And I might put a little bit back here behind where you're going to be able to see. That way, the black paint that I'm going to be filling in with after I do the highlights and the residual light on the edge of the hole, you know, because it's going to be backside, so you got to paint everything in reverse. So since this is going to be on the back, you're going to have to do the glow paint along the edge, and then you're going to have to later go back and add the residual light that's beyond just the edge. And then just start by, you don't have to worry about the quality of the line too much, because when it's wet you can go back and clean it up with the tip of the stick, kind of like that. And the other thing too is I would have the glow paint make sure that it actually goes past the edges also, because dim spots in the glow paint can, you know, show that it's not connected when the viewer's looking at it. And when you do it, you don't have to worry about it going on too thick the first time. It's more about getting the tracer line, because once you do try it, you'll see right away that if you just get some kind of line going, since the paint is, you know, kind of gritty, it's the same concept as it pulls the paint off of your paintbrush. It also kind of pulls the paint off the bamboo skewer. So you can see how it comes out past this edge. I think it's pretty important to make sure that the opposite side sticks out a little further so that you can see what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and start this up. I'm going to need to do a couple of coats. As you can see, that was pretty much about all I'm going to do for the extra highlighting. So what you got to do next is you're going to have to double check the brightness of the front side compared to the edge for the back side of the hole. And the important thing is to make sure that the back side of the hole is bright enough to match this before you put the black paint on. So with that, I'm going to let this dry, and I'm probably going to do one more coat of the extra highlight going around the edge, and once that dries and I get to the point where I can add black, then we'll pick it back up. Now what I'm going to be doing is putting coats of black paint on the back side. And it's important to make sure that you coat the backside paint pretty well, because the rocks that might be on that part of the panel, if you decide to put them over the whole part, you're going to want the black to be thick enough to block any kind of light penetration to the panel below. I went ahead and put a piece of blue tape going across. This is going to be to help me keep all my lines that are for where the comet went through to be nice and straight. What I did was I put the tape on, and then I checked it with the T-ruler. So if you want to make sure that you got the top as the top, then flip over the panel left to right, as opposed to flipping it towards you from flat on the table. So this will be the bottom down here. And then what I do is I'll pick one of the marks on the T-roller, one of the lines for like an 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch, and I'll follow along and I'll slide along the bottom edge of the panel, and I'll watch the line and make sure that the tape doesn't go above or too far below that line. Now I'm at the point to where I'm going to have one large rock on the panel with the moon, and then I'm going to have some of the streaks going through. Then I'll start adding more rocks to different layers and start adding a lot more of the debris and the rocks going towards the top. What I want to do is I want to have the chunk from the moon that's a large chunk on the same panel. I'm going to put it a little bit over from the opening. I'm planning on putting two other large rocks, maybe even a third on the panel behind this, but the other 2 rocks that I'm going to put in are going to be on the panel above this. Usually when you put objects on the same panel as something else and the lighting is going to go from one side to the other, and the object is in front of whatever the larger object is, you're going to probably want to do like a shadow cast across the surface. And then of course you can manipulate it so that the line looks like it's going around with the curvature of the moon and all that stuff. I'm going to just kind of do the rock piece a little further than the natural curve where that would be, so I'm going to put it out here. So I'm going to try to scrape the shape of it in the 2 parts of what I want to show. I'm going to do the circle type of area first, which is going to be the highlight surface, and then I'm also going to add kind of like a triangular shape, so that way it looks kind of like a plug that came out, and it's not too much of a round shape, because like I said, I want this to look like it's a piece of the moon surface that is like a large chunk floating in front of it. Also add a few crosshatch lines, that way the paint can stick really well to this. After this, what I'll be doing is I'll be adding the black paint. On these, I go over the line that I scratched into the panel. This one is going to be the only one that's larger that's on the same panel as the moon. I got a handful of spacers here. I use about 8 spacers for this size of clear panel, so I can support the weight and it doesn't sag too much. Plus then, if I'm still waiting for paint to dry, I can still check where everything is while it's drying, because the panels won't be touching each other. So with that in mind, this is going to be a little bit deeper into the painting, and the way I progress my paintings of rocks is I'll start with like a larger gap between the panels up near the top, and then as I go deeper into the painting, I'll reduce the amount of space between the panels, and by the time I get here, I'm going to be down to like the 1/4 inch type of spacing between the panels. So when I go to do this, I'm going to use the spacers I use for the 1/4 inch spacing, and I'm going to line them up on the panel, and I put them going from like the corner, 2 in the middle, and then 1 to the other corner. And then I'm going to stack another clear panel on top of this one, like so. And then for now, I'll just be going over how to do the top side rocks. These panels probably won't have any backside rocks until I get to doing the smaller rocks and the debris and dust and stuff like that. I'm going to go with putting 2 rocks on this panel above the moon. So then, let me grab my paper towel. So the way I was thinking about it was I kind of wanted to have like a thinner lit surface for one that kind of broke off on a curve, like in a point, and floating out up here. And then I'm going to have the other piece on this panel, the other large piece, down near the bottom, but it's going to be out a little bit further, kind of like they're all drifting away from the moon a little bit at different distances, so it gives it like a more scattered, realistic type of look to my eye anyways. So I'm going to have I'm gonna have that other rock out here, and I'm gonna do the same type of thing. I'm just gonna scratch in the surface area that's gonna be lit. And this one I'm gonna kind of make it a little bit bigger, because this is also gonna be on the panel above the moon. So keeping with the illusion of the distance, as you come up to the top of the painting, you're gonna wanna have things be bigger and bigger. That way they kind of have a relevant size to each other that tells your eye that, you know, one is further away than the other. So I'm going to do the same type of thing. I think on this one I'm going to put much less for the pointy back part, like something like that. And then go ahead and I'm going to score this. The other thing you can do too is, if you're not sure where you want to put all your rocks, I kind of already have an idea where I want things to go. So what you can do is you can just put like a black dot of paint where you're thinking of putting rocks, and then kind of imagine what they'll look like. And you know, it's really easy to scrape the paint off without damaging the panel too badly. So that way it gives you a chance to kind of evaluate your decision. So as you can see too, is scraping this out, it's a whole lot easier to see because of the black sheet. For the other large chunk, I'm going to put it probably right about out here, just so that it's kind of not all lined up the same, you know, with the shape of the moon. So I'm going to do, this one's going to be more of like a rounder kind of chunk, kind of going a different way. I also like to teeter-totter them, going different directions. I think it looks really cool and gives it that really hectic look of just rocks getting blown and tumbling out of the way in zero gravity. You know, they can kind of be in any position, and it's kind of cool looking when you got them going all different wacko directions with the shape of the rocks. And you don't have to do these types of rocks. You can do different styles of rocks. You can do them more like larger chunks that are like more square shape or more pointy, like the hole. So I'm going to paint them in black. And then of course, just like doing the moon with the black paint, you're going to have to do probably a few coats. So I'm going to try to stay with the shape I got going because I like it. But of course, you can always go back with the bamboo skewer and scrape the paint, you know, a little more uniform to how you actually want it. If, you know, like I said, I push too hard with the brushes, so a lot of the time I gotta go back and clean up my stuff. So I'm gonna stop here, and then when I'm ready to put the glow paint on, I'll pick it back up. So see you on the next one.